Hidden among the mountains of northern Ethiopia lies a city long forgotten by time. Moss-covered stones, weather-worn obelisks, and sunken tombs are all that remain of an empire that once stood shoulder to shoulder with Rome, Persia, and Byzantium. This is Aksum, a name you won't find in many textbooks, but one that once echoed through ancient trade routes and royal courts. The kingdom of Aksum flourished from roughly the 1st to the 7th century CE, nestled in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. It became one of the greatest powers of its time, a commercial, religious, and military giant, connecting Africa to the broader ancient world. Yet, while the Roman Colosseum still stands and the pyramids of Giza draw millions, Aksum has faded from the global memory. Why was this powerful African empire forgotten? And what can its story teach us about history, and how it is told? This documentary is a journey into the heart of the Forgotten Kingdom of Aksum, a story carved in stone, minted in gold, and buried beneath centuries of silence. Persia and China. Yet today, the average history student may not recognize the name. Unlike the Roman Empire, which left behind libraries of scrolls and city ruins sprawling across Europe, Aksum's legacy was preserved mostly in stone inscriptions, coins, and oral traditions, many of which were buried, looted, or dismissed during centuries of colonial neglect. What survives of Aksum tells a remarkable story. A story of kings who minted their own currency, who commanded armies across the Red Sea, and who converted to Christianity nearly a century before the Roman Empire officially did. It is not just a documentary about ancient ruins. It is an exploration of forgotten power, African excellence, and the way history is preserved, or erased. Why was Aksum forgotten while other empires were mythologized? The answer lies not in Aksum's lack of grandeur, but in the world's failure to value African narratives as central to human civilization. Colonial historiography, the tendency of Western scholars to center Europe and the Middle East, contributed to the marginalization of Aksum in historical discourse. But the tide is turning. Modern archaeology, African scholarship, and the Ethiopian people are reviving interest in this once mighty civilization. And with good reason. Aksum was a pioneer of trade, diplomacy, architecture, and religion. Its story weaves together African ingenuity, global connections, and spiritual transformation. It's a story that must be told, not just for Ethiopia, but for all of us. Over the next 1 hour, we'll journey through the rise and reign of Aksum. We'll uncover its early kings and the myths that surround its origins. We'll explore how Aksum grew into a mighty trade empire, forging links from the Nile to the Ganges. We'll walk through ancient cities and towering obelisks that once marked the graves of kings. We'll witness the conversion of an empire to Christianity, and how it reshaped Aksumite identity forever. We'll follow the kingdom's military campaigns beyond Africa's shores and into the Arabian Peninsula. We'll examine its slow and mysterious decline, and the cultural legacy it left behind. And finally, we'll reflect on what it means to remember a forgotten kingdom, and why that remembrance matters in today's world. This is a story of power and piety, of resilience and reinvention. A story in which Africa is not a periphery to the ancient world, but a key player at its very center. The Forgotten Kingdom of Aksum is not just history. It is a mirror, reflecting how we choose to remember, and what we choose to forget. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, the stones still whisper, "It's time we listened." Long before Aksum rose to prominence, the highlands of East Africa cradled a series of ancient cultures, each layering stone upon stone to build what would become one of the greatest empires of the ancient world. To understand Aksum's greatness, we must first understand its roots, deep, ancient, and uniquely African. Aksum's heartland lay in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, a region blessed with fertile volcanic soil, temperate climate, and access to both the Red Sea and the Nile River systems. These highlands provided ideal conditions for agriculture, sustaining a population that could support urban development and military growth. More importantly, Aksum sat at a commercial crossroads. To the north lay Egypt and the Roman world. To the east, Arabia and the vast Indian Ocean network. And to the west, the riches of the African interior. It was here, at this geographic intersection, that a new power began to emerge around the 1st century CE. From Dermti to Aksum, cultural inheritance, Aksum didn't emerge from a vacuum. Its origins are closely tied to the earlier kingdom of Dermti, which thrived in the same region from around the 10th to the 5th century BCE. The capital of Dermti, Yeha, still stands in ruin today. Its monumental temple, over 2,500 years old, bears the marks of South Arabian influence, particularly from the Sabaean culture across the Red Sea in modern-day Yemen. Inscriptions from Yeha are in Sabaic, suggesting close ties, whether by trade, colonization, or migration. But over time, the local people began to forge their own distinct identity, blending foreign elements with indigenous African traditions. The rise of Aksumite kingship. By the turn of the Common Era, a new political entity had formed, the Kingdom of Aksum, led by a centralized monarchy and supported by an elite warrior class. One of the earliest known kings was Gdrt, pronounced Gudarat, who reigned in the late 2nd or early 3rd century CE. His inscriptions describe a strong military leader involved in both African and Arabian affairs, marking the beginning of Aksum's outward expansion. These inscriptions were written in Gay, a Semitic language that would become the liturgical tongue of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and survive, even today, as a language of ritual and history. __. Symbols of power, the monumental stele. As Aksum's kings consolidated power, they began erecting some of the most breathtaking monuments in Africa, the stele of Aksum. These towering obelisks, carved from a single piece of granite, served as grave markers for royal tombs and symbols of absolute authority. The largest of them, now collapsed, once stood over 33 meters tall, the tallest monolithic stele ever attempted in the ancient world. Unlike Egyptian obelisks, Aksumite stelae were intricately decorated to resemble multi-story buildings, complete with carved windows, doors, and even symbolic locks, suggesting they may have represented the king's palace in the afterlife. These were not just technical marvels, they were statements of divine kingship, of stability, and of architectural genius. Before Christianity reached the highlands, Aksum's religious world was polytheistic, centered on deities of war, fertility, and protection. The chief god was Marum, often associated with the king himself, who was believed to rule by divine favor. Inscriptions refer to kings as sons of Marum, echoing divine right monarchies in other parts of the world. Rituals likely included animal sacrifice, processions, and celestial observation. The stele fields, royal tombs, and temple sites show a sophisticated religious structure, one that would later absorb and transform under Christian influence. One of the most enduring legacies of Aksum's rise was the adoption of a written language, the Gay script, derived from South Arabian origins but adapted for local use. Gay enabled the recording of royal achievements, trade records, and religious texts. It became the backbone of Aksumite administration, and would remain the sacred script of Ethiopian Christianity for centuries. In an era where much of sub-Saharan Africa relied on oral tradition, Aksum stood out for its written documentation, preserving history in stone. By the late 3rd century CE, Aksum had evolved from a highland kingdom into a formidable regional power. Its kings commanded armies, built monumental cities, and maintained control over Obelisks, one of the most important ports in the Red Sea. Foreign traders, from India, Egypt, even Rome, visited Aksumite territory, describing its people, goods, and power. There is a harbor called Obelisks, about which the people are very great merchants. They deal in ivory, tortoise shell, and slaves. These accounts confirm what archaeology reveals: Aksum was no isolated kingdom. It was a thriving node in a vast interconnected world. Aksum's rise was no accident. It was the result of natural abundance, strategic location, cultural fusion, and visionary kingship. From sacred altars to stone stelae, from highland villages to bustling ports, the Aksumites built the foundation of an empire. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how this kingdom became one of the wealthiest trade empires of the ancient world, minting its own coins, sending caravans across deserts, and linking Africa to Arabia, Persia, and India. The rise of Aksum was only the beginning. In the ancient world, power was measured not only by armies and monuments, but by wealth, and wealth flowed through trade. For the kingdom of Aksum, trade was the lifeblood of empire. It brought gold and glory, connected its people to distant civilizations, and elevated Aksum into one of the great commercial centers of antiquity. Aksum's commercial strength centered on Obelisks, its premier seaport on the Red Sea. Located near modern-day Massawa in Eritrea, Obelisks connected Aksum's highland interior to the maritime networks of the ancient world. Goods arrived by camel caravan from the interior, while seagoing vessels brought traders from Arabia, India, and beyond. Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Persian, and Indian merchants all walked these docks. Aksum's location gave it control over one of the world's busiest ancient trade routes, linking the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean through the Red Sea. What did Aksum trade? The kingdom exported ivory, gold, rhino horn, iron tools, agricultural products, and slaves, all highly prized in the Mediterranean and Near East. It imported silks, glassware, wine, olive oil, spices, and luxury goods from across Asia and Europe. Aksum's interior was rich in resources. Vast forests and fertile fields produced surplus grain. Wild elephants provided ivory. Gold was panned from rivers and extracted from mines. Gold, in particular, was central to Aksum's wealth, enabling it to play a key role in the global economy and support a powerful monarchy. Aksum was the first sub-Saharan African state to mint its own coinage, beginning in the late 3rd century CE. These coins were not only tools of commerce, they were statements of power, prestige, and identity. Gold coins were used in international trade. Silver and bronze served domestic markets. The coins bore images of Aksumite kings, often accompanied by symbols of authority and, later, Christian crosses. In doing so, Aksum joined the small elite club of ancient kingdoms that operated formal monetary systems, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. The quality and consistency of Aksumite coinage gave its money wide credibility. Aksumite coins have been found as far afield as India and Egypt. They spoke a language of legitimacy in a globalized ancient world. Blank. Adulis is a port for great ivory, tortoiseshell, rhinoceros horn, and slaves. These are brought from the interior by the people of the Kingdom of Aksum. Written in the 1st century CE, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea gives us a rare glimpse into how outsiders saw Aksum. It recognized the kingdom as an important supplier of raw materials and a rising commercial power. These records confirm Aksum's deep integration into the world economy. It was not isolated, it was indispensable. While maritime trade at Adulis drew the most attention, Aksum also relied heavily on overland trade across the African interior. Caravans transported goods from the southern and western territories, including Nubia and the Ethiopian Rift Valley, using a sophisticated system of roads and royal rest stops. Aksumite kings invested in roads, bridges, and caravan security. These overland routes brought livestock, incense, obsidian, salt, and enslaved people to the capital and ports. Trade sustained not only Aksum's wealth but its social hierarchy, urban centers, and military campaigns. Aksumite merchants were among the most skilled negotiators in the ancient world. They navigated customs, currencies, and cultures, often acting as intermediaries between rival empires. Aksum's rulers sent diplomatic embassies to the Roman Empire and received envoys from the Byzantine court. Letters, gifts, and even religious texts passed between Aksum and Constantinople. These relationships enhanced trade and cemented Aksum's place on the world stage. To maintain its agricultural base and support trade, Aksum invested in innovative farming techniques. Terracing, irrigation, and water storage systems allowed crops to thrive even in difficult terrain. This stable food supply enabled cities to grow and ensured there was always surplus to trade, a key factor in maintaining long-term economic prosperity. Aksum's wealth was not just based on extraction, it was supported by sustainable systems of production. Aksum's economy was not a side effect of empire. It was a foundation of power. The control of trade routes, both land and sea, gave the kingdom strategic leverage in regional politics. Aksum could block rivals, tax merchants, and fund its army and infrastructure, all through the wealth flowing from commerce. As a result, its kings could launch military expeditions, commission monumental architecture, and convert to Christianity, all while maintaining a stable economy. In the grand tapestry of ancient trade, Aksum was not merely a thread, it was a golden strand that wove Africa into the economic fabric of the ancient world. Its wealth built cities, funded armies, and connected peoples across continents. But that wealth also brought exposure, and with it, new religions, new enemies, and profound transformation. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how this prosperous empire embraced one of the world's most enduring faiths, Christianity, and in doing so, reshaped its identity forever. To know a civilization, we must walk its streets, observe its customs, and step inside its homes and sanctuaries. Beyond its military and economic might, the Kingdom of Aksum was a flourishing society, rich in culture, layered in complexity, and stunning in its artistic and architectural expression. This was not merely a kingdom of conquest and commerce. It was a society of engineers, artisans, scribes, farmers, priests, and poets. A civilization that built in stone, recorded in script, and worshipped through ritual. At its height, Aksum's capital was a bustling urban center. Homes were built of stone or mud brick, often organized around courtyards. The elite lived in multi-room compounds, while commoners inhabited simpler dwellings. The city boasted granaries, water reservoirs, markets, and temples. Royal compounds, enclosed by massive stone walls, featured large halls and ceremonial platforms. Aksumite cities were built with a clear social order. At the center stood the king's palace and sacred sites. Around it, the nobility, followed by merchant and artisan quarters, and finally the rural periphery. Though little of the superstructure survives, the stone foundations reveal careful planning and complex construction, a civilization that understood scale, balance, and permanence. Aksumite society was hierarchical. At the top stood the Negus Nagast, the king of kings. His rule was divinely sanctioned and politically absolute. Beneath him was a noble class of landowners and military commanders. These elites owned vast agricultural estates, oversaw trade caravans, and administered justice. Artisans, merchants, and scribes formed a thriving middle tier, vital to urban life. Farmers and laborers worked the fields and served in construction and transport. The distribution of grave goods, from ornate jewelry to simple pottery, offers a vivid snapshot of social stratification in life and in death. Yet, Aksumite society was not rigidly closed. Evidence suggests that wealth, skill, or royal favor could elevate a family's status across generations. Women in Aksum held more agency than in many contemporary civilizations. While men dominated political and military life, elite women owned property, appeared in inscriptions, and were buried with high-value goods, indicating independent status and social respect. Gay inscriptions mention queen mothers and consorts, some of whom may have played significant diplomatic or religious roles. Everyday women were central to the economy, managing households, engaging in market trade, and producing textiles, pottery, and foodstuffs. Among Aksum's most iconic contributions to world heritage are its stele, monolithic obelisks hewn from solid granite. These monuments, ranging from a few meters to over 30 meters tall, were not symbols of vanity, they were sacred. They marked royal tombs and possibly aligned with celestial events. Unlike Egyptian obelisks, Aksumite stele mimic multi-story buildings, an architectural metaphor for the king's eternal residence in the afterlife. How were they made? Quarried from nearby hills, stele were carved using iron chisels and then transported, likely on sleds and wooden rollers. Erecting them, especially the largest ones, would have required intricate engineering, coordinated labor, and religious ceremony. Some collapsed during or after construction, including the largest known, weighing over 500 tons. Royal tombs beneath the stele were carefully constructed, with multi-room chambers sealed by stone slabs. Inside were bodies wrapped in cloth, surrounded by pottery, gold jewelry, and imported goods, evidence of both wealth and belief in the afterlife. Non-royal burials were simpler but still marked by ritual. Burial mounds, inscribed headstones, and offerings point to a society that revered ancestry and marked death with solemnity. Before Christianity, Aksumite religion was polytheistic and animistic, centered on gods like Marum, the god of war, and Bea, god of the sea. Temples and open-air altars were common. Kings were considered semi-divine, their lineage tied to gods, their rule ordained by celestial favor. Inscriptions invoked divine protection before military campaigns or after victories. Sacrifices, often animals, played a central role in both royal and public rituals. Aksumite artisans produced finely made ceramics, often stamped with geometric designs or inscriptions. Goldsmiths and jewelers crafted earrings, necklaces, and crowns, using gold, silver, carnelian, and glass beads. The artistry reflected cultural connections to Arabia, the Mediterranean, and indigenous African styles. Inscriptions in the Gay script were carved on stone slabs, coins, and stele, a tradition that preserved both royal propaganda and sacred narrative. The script, still used in Ethiopia's liturgy today, connects modern Ethiopians to their Aksumite forebears in a continuous thread of language and faith. Aksumite architecture was functional, elegant, and uniquely African. Foundations of palaces suggest multi-level buildings with stone staircases, columned halls, and internal courtyards. Water reservoirs and drainage systems reveal advanced hydrological engineering, crucial in a region with seasonal rains. Early Christian churches, built later, adopted basilica styles but incorporated local building materials and motifs. These structures embody Aksum's ability to absorb external influences and reshape them into something distinct and lasting. The people of Aksum were more than warriors and traders. They were builders, thinkers, and artists. Their society left behind more than monuments, it left a cultural legacy that still pulses through Ethiopia's highlands today. In the next chapter, we explore a turning point in Aksum's identity, the arrival of Christianity, and the kingdom's embrace of a new spiritual path that would transform its politics, its art, and its legacy forever. By the 4th century CE, a spiritual transformation swept across the kingdom of Aksum, one that would shape its culture, politics, and identity for centuries to come. This was the conversion to Christianity, a shift that would not only place Aksum among the world's earliest officially Christian states, but also serve to anchor it within the broader tapestry of ancient religious history. At the time of Aksum's rise, Christianity was no longer a fringe sect in the Roman Empire. By 313 CE, Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan had legalized the religion. A decade later, Christianity's political fortunes were ascending rapidly across the Mediterranean world. Aksum, with its strategic location between the Roman and Persian spheres of influence, was both a beneficiary and participant in this broader religious shift. Merchants, missionaries, and emissaries traveled freely between Alexandria and the Red Sea ports, and it is through this bustling interchange that Christian ideas first entered the Aksumite court. The most significant milestone came under the reign of King Ezana, early to mid-4th century CE, widely credited as the first Aksumite monarch to adopt Christianity officially. Historical and epigraphic records, particularly inscriptions in Ge'ez, Greek, and Sabaean, show a clear transition in Ezana's titles and proclamations. Early in his rule, he refers to himself as a servant of the war god Marum, associated with pre-Christian Aksumite religion. Later, he openly declares himself a follower of the God of Heaven, aligning himself with Christian monotheism. The process of his conversion is linked to Frumentius, a Syrian Christian who was shipwrecked on the Red Sea coast and eventually rose to prominence at the Aksumite court. According to later ecclesiastical histories, Frumentius tutored Ezana and his brother, and after gaining favor, was instrumental in spreading Christian teachings. He later traveled to Alexandria to be ordained by Patriarch Athanasius, becoming the first bishop of Aksum. This appointment not only formalized Aksum's entry into the Christian world but also tethered it to the theological authority of the Coptic Church of Egypt, a link that would persist in various forms for over a millennium. Ezana's conversion was not simply a personal or spiritual decision. It was a political act with far-reaching consequences. Declaring Christianity as the state religion helped consolidate Ezana's rule and provided ideological unity within his diverse empire. The new Christian identity was woven into statecraft and public life. Coins minted during Ezana's later reign feature the Christian cross, replacing older symbols like the disc and crescent. These coins, some of the earliest in the world to bear overt Christian imagery, were circulated widely, reflecting both religious devotion and political propaganda. Furthermore, inscriptions from this period reflect the language of divine kingship. Ezana refers to himself as the chosen of God, a motif that legitimized his rule while reinforcing the sanctity of the Christian faith. Christianity's tangible imprint on Aksum can also be seen in its architecture. The earliest churches in Aksum were likely constructed atop former pagan sites, following a pattern seen elsewhere in the Christianizing world. These structures, although largely in ruins today, were modeled on Roman basilicas but built with distinct Aksumite techniques, such as the use of rough stone masonry and wooden beam reinforcements. By the 5th and 6th centuries, monasteries began to appear in the countryside, and Aksumite monks played a significant role in local governance, education, and diplomacy. Religious institutions also became centers of manuscript production, which would later contribute to the flowering of Ge'ez Christian literature. Aksum's Christianity, although initially aligned with the broader Nicene Creed, would eventually follow the Miaphysite tradition, separating itself from the theological developments of Western Europe after the Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE. This placed Aksum in communion with the Oriental Orthodox churches, such as the Copts and Syriacs, rather than the Latin West or Byzantine East. This theological divide would have long-term consequences. As Europe entered the Middle Ages and Islam expanded across North Africa, Aksum found itself increasingly isolated, both geographically and doctrinally, from the Christian centers of Rome and Constantinople. Yet despite this, Aksum's Christian tradition persisted. Pilgrims continued to visit Jerusalem and Alexandria, and the Aksumite Church retained a strong monastic culture that emphasized biblical study, liturgical music, and the translation of religious texts. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Aksum's conversion is the deep intertwining of Christianity with Ethiopian identity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, which traces its origins to Frumentius and King Ezana, remains one of the oldest Christian institutions in the world. Even during later periods of fragmentation, foreign invasions, or Islamic encirclement, the memory of Aksum as a Christian kingdom, a land of faith, endurance, and divine favor, became a source of national pride. This memory would inform medieval Ethiopian chronicles, artworks, and religious traditions for centuries. However, Aksum's religious prominence was not enough to shield it from eventual decline. As Islamic powers rose across the Red Sea and control of trade routes shifted, Aksum lost its strategic and economic relevance. Coastal ports such as Obelisks were abandoned or overrun, and by the 7th century, Aksum began to recede into the Ethiopian highlands. Yet, while its material empire faded, its spiritual legacy remained unbroken. The Christian institutions founded in the 4th and 5th centuries adapted and endured, laying the groundwork for the later Zagwe and Solomonic dynasties, which would position themselves as successors to the Aksumite kings, divinely appointed and guardians of the true faith. Long before modern borders were drawn, Aksum stood as a beacon of connectivity, its economy pulsing in rhythm with some of the most vital trade arteries of the ancient world. Positioned at the crossroads of Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean, the Aksumite kingdom was not an isolated realm tucked away in the highlands. It was, instead, a cosmopolitan powerhouse fueled by long-distance trade, diplomatic reach, and economic innovation. The kingdom's geographic location was a gift of both nature and strategy. Nestled in the Horn of Africa and flanked by the Red Sea, Aksum served as a key intermediary between the Roman Empire, the Indian subcontinent, and the heartlands of Africa. From its bustling ports, most notably Obelisks on the Red Sea coast, Aksumite merchants dispatched goods across 3 continents, forging one of the earliest globalized economies in the ancient world. Aksum exported a bounty of commodities. Chief among them was ivory, sourced from African interior regions and prized by Roman elites. Frankincense and myrrh, aromatic resins used in religious and medical practices, were also high on the list. These goods traveled north to Egypt and the Mediterranean, while textiles, glassware, wine, and metal goods flowed in from the Roman world. Aksum's ports also welcomed ships from India, bringing spices, precious stones, and silks. In turn, Aksumite traders carried African goods deep into Arabia and beyond, creating a network of exchange that transcended continents and religions. Aksumite merchants learned to navigate not just sea currents, but also complex intercultural relationships. Perhaps one of the most remarkable testaments to Aksum's commercial success is its currency. Aksum was among the few ancient African states to mint its own coins, beginning around the late 3rd century CE. These were not crude imitations but sophisticated gold, silver, and bronze coinage stamped with images of kings, inscriptions in Greek and Gaelic, and, later, crosses, symbolizing the Christian faith. These coins weren't used only within Aksum's borders. They circulated widely, found as far afield as southern Arabia, Egypt, and even India. The consistent purity of Aksumite gold coins earned him a reputation of trust, placing him alongside Roman and Byzantine currencies in prestige. Through coinage, Aksum didn't just trade, it branded itself as an equal player on the world stage. But trade alone does not build an empire. Aksum's rulers were shrewd diplomats, forging ties with the Roman Empire and later the Byzantines. There are accounts, most notably from Roman historians and ecclesiastical writers, of Aksumite embassies reaching Constantinople, and of Roman envoys journeying in return. These exchanges weren't only economic, they were political and religious. The conversion of Emperor Ezana to Christianity, for instance, aligned Aksum ideologically with the Christian Roman world, a move that solidified diplomatic rapport and likely expanded trade preferences. This religious unity also helped stabilize relations with Byzantium, opening the door to mutually beneficial naval cooperation and ecclesiastical correspondence. Aksum's strategic and economic interests also drew it into military affairs. In the 6th century CE, Aksum famously intervened in the Arabian Peninsula. The Himyarite kingdom in southern Arabia had persecuted Christians, prompting the Christian Aksumites, backed in spirit by the Byzantines, to launch a military campaign across the Red Sea. They successfully established a Christian vassal state in Yemen, showcasing Aksum's capability to project power beyond its shores. This move was not purely altruistic. Controlling trade access points on both sides of the Red Sea strengthened Aksum's grip on maritime commerce, ensuring that the kingdom remained the gatekeeper of goods flowing between east and west. It was a reminder that Aksum's wealth wasn't a passive inheritance, it was actively defended and expanded. Obelisks, once a thriving international hub, was at the heart of this enterprise. Descriptions from ancient travelers paint a picture of a busy port town, teeming with merchants, translators, tax collectors, and dockworkers. Goods from Africa's interior would arrive via camel caravan, to be loaded onto ships bound for Alexandria or Ceylon. Languages from across the ancient world echoed through its markets. Here, Aksum's identity as a maritime empire came fully alive. Back inland, the prosperity generated by trade-funded monumental building projects, stone obelisks, churches, palaces, and supported a complex agricultural system. Aksumite elites lived in cities adorned with foreign luxuries, while rural areas benefited from food redistribution and infrastructure built on commercial wealth. But Aksum's trade networks, for all their brilliance, were not invulnerable. Shifts in global trade patterns, particularly the rise of Persian control over key sea routes and later Islamic dominance of the Red Sea, began to erode Aksum's access to foreign markets. Internal challenges, perhaps environmental degradation or overextension, may have compounded the problem. Still, during its zenith, Aksum stood tall among the ancient world's great economic powers. It bridged Africa with Arabia, India, and the Roman world, not as a colony, not as a satellite, but as a sovereign force. Through its wealth and its diplomacy, Aksum built an empire that traded not just in goods, but in ideas, faith, and influence. The kingdom of Aksum, once a mighty beacon of trade, culture, and early Christianity, began to fade from the forefront of world affairs by the late 1st millennium CE. Its decline was not sudden, but gradual, a slow unraveling of an empire once hailed by Persian emissaries and Roman scholars as one of the great powers of the world. The seeds of decline were sown through a combination of internal and external pressures. By the 7th century, the Islamic Caliphate was rapidly expanding across the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa. As Muslim forces took control of key trade routes and ports along the Red Sea and Mediterranean, Aksum found itself economically isolated. No longer could it dominate the flow of goods between India, Byzantium, and the Roman world. Moreover, the rise of powerful Islamic port cities like Aden and Jeddah shifted maritime trade away from Aksum's ports, especially the once bustling city of Obelisks. Obelisks had long been Aksum's maritime gateway to the world. Now, it was either under threat or fully eclipsed by Islamic rivals. This redirection of trade meant fewer taxes, fewer ships, and a sharp decline in wealth flowing into the Aksumite heartland. Internally, this economic strain was compounded by ecological challenges. Some archaeologists point to evidence of land degradation, perhaps from centuries of intensive farming. Deforestation and overcultivation may have led to soil exhaustion, particularly in the northern highlands where Aksum was based. As the environment suffered, so too did the agricultural backbone of the empire. Climate change may have also played a role. Shifts in rainfall patterns in the Horn of Africa during this period could have led to prolonged droughts, affecting both harvests and the kingdom's stability. By the 8th and 9th centuries, Aksum was no longer the vibrant imperial power it had once been. Yet, it did not collapse entirely. Rather than falling to invading armies, the Aksumite rulers made a strategic retreat. They abandoned their lowland and coastal cities, which were increasingly vulnerable, and shifted the political and religious center of power southward, toward the highlands of what is today the Tigray and Amhara regions of Ethiopia. This migration of power marked the transition from the classical Aksumite Empire to the early medieval Christian kingdoms of Ethiopia. The relocation preserved elements of Aksumite culture, language, and religion, even as the old capital faded into obscurity. One of the most striking signs of this cultural continuity is the Ge'ez script and language. Once the administrative and liturgical language of Aksum, Ge'ez survives today as the sacred language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It remains a bridge between the ancient and the modern, linking a forgotten empire to present-day religious practice. Perhaps Aksum's most enduring legacy lies in its religious influence. Although the empire's political power waned, its conversion to Christianity and the establishment of a Christian ecclesiastical structure left a deep and lasting mark on the region. Even after contact with the Mediterranean world diminished, the Ethiopian Church maintained its doctrinal links with Alexandria in Egypt. The tradition of appointing bishops, or abunas, from the Coptic Patriarchate continued for centuries. This relationship fostered a uniquely Ethiopian form of Christianity, one that preserved ancient Judeo-Christian traditions, scriptural interpretations, and liturgical music styles long abandoned elsewhere. The spiritual lineage of Aksum provided a foundation for the Zagwe dynasty in the 12th century and later the Solomonic dynasty, which traced its origins back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, an Aksumite-era legend deeply embedded in Ethiopian identity. This sense of historical and divine continuity gave the Ethiopian church and monarchy legitimacy for generations. Today, what remains of Aksum speaks both of grandeur and loss. Towering granite obelisks, carved without mortar and weighing hundreds of tons, still pierce the sky in the ancient city of Aksum. These stelae, once grave markers for kings and nobles, are a silent testament to the technological prowess and ceremonial sophistication of the kingdom. The most famous of these, the Obelisk of Aksum, was looted by Italian forces in 1937 during Mussolini's occupation and taken to Rome. It wasn't returned until 2005, a symbolic act of post-colonial reconciliation that reminded the world of Aksum's lasting importance. Archaeological excavations continue to this day, revealing palaces, coins, burial chambers, and Christian basilicas that further unravel the story of this forgotten African power. Yet much of Aksum's grandeur still lies beneath the surface, awaiting discovery. Though long overshadowed in mainstream historical narratives, Aksum deserves its place among the great civilizations of the ancient world. It was a melting pot of trade, faith, innovation, and diplomacy. It maintained contact with Rome, Persia, India, and Byzantium, and helped shape the religious and cultural contours of the Horn of Africa. Its story complicates the dominant narrative that African history is one of isolated tribes and colonial subjugation. Aksum stands as proof that sophisticated urban centers, transcontinental diplomacy, and theological innovation were not only present in ancient Africa, they thrived. Its decline did not mark the end of Ethiopian civilization, but rather a transformation. The ideas, symbols, and institutions born in Aksum found new life in later Ethiopian states, ensuring the kingdom's spirit endured across millennia. The kingdom of Aksum may have fallen into obscurity in the eyes of the world, but for millions in Ethiopia, and for history, it remains a sacred origin. In stone, in scripture, and in spirit, Aksum lives on. The kingdom of Aksum, once cloaked in mystery, monumental architecture, and spiritual grandeur, slowly faded from global memory. For centuries, its story lay dormant, buried under layers of time, legend, and neglect. But like its great obelisks piercing the sky, the memory of Aksum refused to be forgotten. By the 19th century, Aksum had become a subject of fascination among European explorers, archaeologists, and missionaries. What was once a bustling metropolis and seat of a mighty empire was now a quiet town dotted with ancient ruins. To the locals, the significance of these relics had never truly disappeared. Oral traditions preserved the glory of Aksum's past. Yet, to the outside world, the kingdom remained elusive, an African civilization often overlooked in favor of Egypt, Carthage, or Nubia. The rediscovery of Aksum began slowly, with travelers like Henry Salt in the early 1800s documenting the towering Stelaean ruins in watercolors and sketches. These early reports stirred academic curiosity across Europe. A civilization that had traded with Rome, minted gold coins, and converted to Christianity before many Western nations, how had it fallen into such obscurity? The answer lay partly in the shifting tides of global power, religious politics, and Eurocentric narratives of history that undervalued African agency. But with time, Aksum began to take its rightful place in the story of global civilization. By the 20th century, the Ethiopian government, alongside international teams, began systematic archaeological studies. Excavations in Aksum unearthed royal tombs, ancient inscriptions in Gay, and the remnants of once grand palaces and churches. Each discovery peeled back a layer of myth and reintroduced the world to a highly organized, literate, and influential African empire. One of the most symbolic moments of Aksum's re-emergence was the return of the Obelisk of Aksum. Looted by Mussolini's regime during Italy's occupation of Ethiopia in 1937, the 24-meter-tall stela was shipped to Rome and re-erected near the Circus Maximus. For decades, it stood as a bitter reminder of colonial exploitation. But in 2005, after years of negotiation, Italy returned the obelisk, and it was reassembled in its original city with reverent ceremony. This act was more than symbolic, it was a restoration of identity and sovereignty. Today, Aksum is more than an archaeological site, it is a living cultural and spiritual hub. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church still regards Aksum as its spiritual heart. Pilgrims journey from across Ethiopia and the diaspora to attend services, visit the legendary Church of St. Mary of Zion, and participate in centuries-old traditions that trace their lineage directly to the kingdom's conversion under King Ezana. The city is also closely linked with one of Christianity's most enduring legends, the Ark of the Covenant. According to Ethiopian tradition, the sacred chest that once held the Ten Commandments rests today within a guarded chapel in Aksum. Though no outsider has verified its presence, the belief remains potent, fusing faith, national pride, and ancient identity into a powerful symbol. Beyond religious significance, the memory of Aksum serves as a cultural anchor for modern Ethiopia. It offers a tangible connection to a time when an African empire spoke to the world with gold coins, monumental architecture, and diplomatic ties stretching from Byzantium to India. In 1980, UNESCO designated the Aksum archaeological sites as a World Heritage Site. This formal recognition helped attract more scholarly attention, tourism, and funding for preservation. Yet, challenges remain. Looting, encroachment, and political instability have at times threatened the integrity of the site. Preservation efforts continue, balancing the need for modern development with the safeguarding of cultural heritage. The study of Aksum has also reshaped academic discourse. Increasingly, scholars emphasize the importance of African civilizations not as peripheral to world history, but as central players in shaping global networks, faith systems, and commerce. Aksum's role in the early Christian world, its maritime trade links, and its independent script, Gay, challenge outdated stereotypes of pre-colonial Africa as isolated or illiterate. Lessons from Aksum. The story of Aksum is not just about ancient achievements, it's about endurance. Aksum teaches us that civilizations rise and fall, but their legacies can echo for millennia. It reminds us that history is not the exclusive domain of the conquerors or the chroniclers, but also of those whose stories are whispered through stone, scripture, and song. It also offers a powerful counter-narrative to colonial conceptions of Africa. Here was a kingdom that chose Christianity on its own terms, engaged with the world's great powers, and left behind a legacy written in stone and scripture. It defies the simplistic categories of lost or primitive, and instead invites us to see Africa as a continent of complexity, resilience, and brilliance. As the sun sets behind the stele of Aksum, casting long shadows over the earth that once bore kings, queens, priests, and merchants, we are reminded that history is never truly lost. It waits, sometimes for centuries, for voices to revive it, for minds to re